My heart was beating so loud I was sure Thomas could hear it from across the room. I lay there in our bed, forcing my breathing to stay slow and steady, keeping my eyes just barely cracked open so I could watch him through my lashes. The bedroom was dark except for the soft glow from the hallway light, and I could see his shadow moving around our dresser. 3 hours earlier, I had done something I never thought I would do to my own husband. When Thomas handed me my nightly cup of chamomile tea, the same ritual we'd shared for months, I pretended to drink it. Instead, I let the warm liquid touch my lips, and then quietly poured it into the plant beside our bed when he wasn't looking. For weeks now, I'd been waking up feeling like my head was stuffed with cotton, my thoughts fuzzy and slow. I'd been losing chunks of time, forgetting conversations we'd had, missing appointments I was sure I'd written down. Tonight, I was going to find out why. Thomas thought I was fast asleep, knocked out by whatever he'd been putting in my tea, but I was wide awake, watching him pull something small and glass from his jacket pocket. Even in the dim light, I could see him measuring drops of clear liquid into a glass of water, being very careful about how much he added. My stomach twisted into knots as I realized this wasn't the first time he'd done this. The movements were too practiced, too smooth. He turned toward the bed and I quickly closed my eyes completely, forcing my body to stay limp. I heard his footsteps on the carpet, getting closer. Then I heard something that made my blood turn to ice, the sound of paper tearing like he was opening something medical. Through my barely open eyelids, I saw him holding a syringe. A syringe. My husband of 4 years was standing next to our bed with a needle, and I was supposed to be unconscious. I wanted to scream, to jump up and run, but I forced myself to stay perfectly still. If Thomas knew I was awake, I had no idea what he might do. So I lay there, pretending to be the drugged, helpless wife he thought I was, while my mind raced with terrifying questions. This all started 3 weeks ago, right after our biggest fight ever. We'd been planning to start a family for 2 years, saving money, talking about baby names, even looking at bigger apartments. Then suddenly, out of nowhere, Thomas said he'd changed his mind. He didn't want kids anymore. When I asked why, he got angry in a way I'd never seen before, shouting that I was being selfish and that some people weren't meant to be parents. That's when the tea ritual started. Thomas said he wanted to help me relax after our fight, that chamomile would help me sleep better. He was so sweet about it, bringing me a fresh cup every night, sitting with me while I drank it. I thought he was trying to make up for our argument. But now I understood the truth. The morning grogginess, the memory problems, the way I'd been feeling disconnected from my own life. It wasn't stress from our fight. It was whatever Thomas had been putting in my tea. I heard him set something down on the nightstand, and the sound of liquid being drawn into the syringe. My whole body wanted to shake with fear. But I kept breathing slowly, in and out, like I was in the deepest sleep of my life. What was he planning to inject me with? How long had this been going on? And the question that scared me most of all, what was Thomas going to do to me tonight that required me to be completely unconscious? Through my eyelashes, I watched him check the syringe, holding it up to catch the light from the hallway. His face looked different in the shadows, cold and focused in a way that made him seem like a stranger. This wasn't the man who used to bring me coffee in bed on Sunday mornings, or who cried during sad movies. Thomas moved closer to the bed, and I heard him whisper something under his breath that made my heart stop completely. "I'm sorry, Nina, but you're not going to remember any of this tomorrow." The next morning, I woke up feeling different. For the first time in weeks, my head was clear. I could think straight, remember things properly. Thomas was already gone for work, and I sat in our kitchen staring at the chamomile tea box on the counter, knowing I could never trust anything he gave me again. I had to be smart about this. If I confronted Thomas without proof, he could deny everything. Worse, he might hurt me or disappear before I could get help. So I decided to become a detective in my own home. First, I went to the electronics store and bought a tiny camera that looked like a phone charger. The salesperson showed me how it could record for hours and store everything on a memory card. I set it up in our bedroom, pointing it toward the nightstand where Thomas prepared my tea each night. Then I started saving samples. Every night when Thomas brought me tea, I would pretend to drink it but secretly pour some into a small container I hid in my makeup bag. Within a week, I had 7 samples of what should have been plain chamomile tea. During the days while Thomas was at work, I searched our house like I was looking for buried treasure. I went through his desk, his closet, even his car when I could get the keys. Most of what I found seemed normal. Work papers, old bills, clothes. But then I discovered something that made my hands shake. Hidden in the back of Thomas's desk drawer behind a stack of old tax papers was a small metal box. Inside were things that didn't belong in our home: medical supplies, rubber gloves, and 3 small bottles with no labels. The bottles contained clear liquid that looked exactly like what I'd seen Thomas measuring that night. I took pictures of everything with my phone, being careful to put it all back exactly how I found it. But the worst discovery was still coming. When I checked our computer, I found that Thomas had been reading my emails and checking my bank accounts. He knew my passwords for everything. I saw searches in the browser history that made me sick to my stomach. How long do sedatives stay in blood? Making someone unconscious safely, and signs of drug overdose. My husband had been researching how to drug me. I knew I needed help, but I was scared to go to the police without more proof. Instead, I called my friend Patricia, who's been a doctor for 15 years. I trusted her completely, and I knew she would believe me. "Nina, you need to bring me those tea samples right now," Patricia said when I told her everything. "If someone's been drugging you, we need to know what with." 2 days later, Patricia called me with results that confirmed my worst fears. "Nina, there's a powerful sedative in these samples. It's called midazolam, and it's what hospitals use to make patients unconscious before surgery. Someone has been giving you enough to knock you out for hours." "How dangerous is it?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "Very dangerous if used wrong. Too much could stop your breathing. And Nina, long-term use can cause permanent memory damage. You need to call the police today." But I wasn't ready yet. I needed to catch Thomas in the act, to have video proof of what he was doing. Patricia made me promise to be careful and to call her every morning so she'd know I was safe. That night, I pretended everything was normal. Thomas brought me my tea with his usual smile, asking about my day, acting like the loving husband he used to be. I smiled back and pretended to drink it, all while knowing he was slowly poisoning me. As I lay in bed pretending to sleep, I watched Thomas through barely open eyes as he prepared another injection. But this time I was recording everything. The tiny camera captured him measuring the clear liquid, filling the syringe, and approaching my bedside. I had my proof now. But as I watched Thomas lean over me with that needle, I realized something terrifying. The amount of liquid in the syringe was much more than usual. Whatever Thomas was planning to do to me, tonight was going to be different. Tonight was going to be worse. The video footage from that night showed me something I wasn't prepared for. When I watched it the next morning, I saw Thomas standing over me for almost 10 minutes, just staring at my face. He whispered things I couldn't hear clearly, but his lips moved like he was having a conversation with my unconscious body. The way he looked at me wasn't loving or guilty. It was cold, like I was already dead to him. I knew I had to dig deeper. And what I found in the following days changed everything I thought I knew about my marriage. Hidden in Thomas's car, underneath the spare tire, I discovered a notebook that made my blood run cold. Page after page of his handwriting, documenting every single time he'd drugged me. The entries went back 6 months, not 3 weeks like I'd thought. 6 months of my life that I'd lost to his poison. Day 1. Gave N2 migraine in evening tea. Unconscious for 4 hours. No memory of bedtime routine. Day 15. Increased to 3 migraines. N slept through smoke alarm test. Dosage effective. Day 45. N asking about memory problems. Told her it's stress from work. She believed it. The entries got worse as I read on. Thomas had been treating me like a lab rat. carefully noting my reactions, adjusting the amounts, studying how the drugs affected me. But the most recent entries made me realize this was about much more than just controlling me. Day 120. Transferred another $5,000 from N's business account. She hasn't noticed. Jennifer says we're almost ready. Jennifer. I'd never heard Thomas mention anyone named Jennifer. I kept reading, and the truth hit me like a truck. Thomas had been stealing money from my graphic design business for months. While I was drugged and confused, he'd been moving my money into accounts I didn't know about. The notebook showed he'd taken over $30,000 so far, but the money wasn't even the worst part. The recent entries talked about Jennifer constantly. Jennifer found us an apartment in Portland. Jennifer says we need to finish this soon. Jennifer is getting impatient about the timeline. My husband was planning to leave me for another woman, and he'd been drugging me to steal my money to fund their new life together. I felt sick reading the final entries from the past week. Day 165, N seems suspicious about the tea, need to be more careful. Day 167, Jennifer says we have enough money now, time for the final phase. Day 170, researched overdose amounts, need to make it look natural. The notebook fell from my shaking hands. Thomas wasn't just planning to leave me, he was planning to kill me. I grabbed my phone and called Patricia immediately. I need to see you right now, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. And I think I need to call the police. An hour later, I sat in Patricia's office, showing her the notebook and the video footage. Her face went white as she read Thomas's entries. Nina, this man has been poisoning you for 6 months. Look at these dosage increases. He's been building up to something. And these final entries. She looked up at me with fear in her eyes. He's planning to murder you and make it look like an overdose. But why? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Because you're worth more to him dead than alive. If you die from an apparent drug overdose, he inherits everything. Your business, your savings, your life insurance. He and this Jennifer woman can start fresh with your money and no one would ever suspect him. Patricia helped me call Detective Brooks, who agreed to meet us immediately. When I showed him the evidence, his expression grew serious. Mrs. Rodriguez, you're in immediate danger. We need to get you somewhere safe tonight. No, I said, surprising myself with how firm my voice sounded. I want to catch him. I want him on video trying to kill me so he can never hurt anyone else. Detective Brooks shook his head. That's too dangerous. We have enough evidence to arrest him now. But what if he gets out on bail? What if he runs? I need to end this completely. I looked at both of them. One more night. Let me wear a wire, set up cameras, and catch him in the act. Then you'll have everything you need to put him away forever. It took an hour of arguing, but finally Detective Brooks agreed. We would set up surveillance around my house, I would wear a recording device, and the moment Thomas tried to hurt me, the police would move in. As I drove home that evening, I realized tonight might be my last night alive if something went wrong. But I also knew it was my only chance to make sure Thomas could never do this to me or anyone else ever again. When I walked into our house, Thomas was already home, cooking dinner and humming like he didn't have a care in the world. He smiled at me like he always did, and I smiled back, both of us pretending to be people we weren't anymore. "How was your day, honey?" he asked, just like a normal husband. "Perfect," I lied, just like I'd been doing for months without even knowing it. Tonight, one of us was going to stop pretending forever. Detective Brooks arrived at Patricia's office at 6 p.m. with equipment that looked like something from a spy movie. The wire was smaller than I expected, just a tiny device that clipped inside my shirt with a microphone no bigger than a button. He showed me how to activate it and explained that officers would be positioned around my house, ready to move in the moment I gave the signal, or if Thomas tried to hurt me. "Remember, Nina, your safety is more important than getting a confession," Detective Brooks said as he tested the equipment. "If you feel like you're in immediate danger, just say the word help clearly, and we'll be inside in seconds." My hands were shaking as I drove home. I kept thinking about Thomas's notebook entries, especially the one about making it look natural. How long had he been planning my death? How many nights had I fallen asleep next to someone who was counting down the days until he could kill me? When I walked into our house, everything looked exactly the same as always. Our wedding photos still smiled down from the walls. The throw pillows I'd picked out were still arranged perfectly on the couch. But now it all felt like a stage set for a play about a happy marriage that had never really existed. Thomas was in the kitchen, and the smell of garlic and herbs filled the air. He was making my favorite pasta dish, the one he'd cooked for our first anniversary. For a moment, I almost forgot why I was there. This was the Thomas I'd fallen in love with. Thoughtful, caring, domestic. But then I remembered the syringe, the notebook, the stolen money, and I knew this was all just another performance. "You're home early," I said, trying to sound normal while the wire recorded every word. "I wanted to make tonight special," Thomas replied, not looking up from the stove. There was something different in his voice, a nervous energy I hadn't heard before. "I thought we could have a nice dinner, maybe talk about some things." "What kind of things?" I asked, sitting at our kitchen table like I had hundreds of times before. Thomas finally turned to face me, and I saw something in his eyes that made my stomach drop. He looked sad, but not the kind of sad that comes from guilt. It was the kind of sad someone gets when they're about to do something they don't want to do but feel they have to. "Nina, I've been thinking a lot about us lately, about our future." He sat down across from me, reaching for my hands. His touch felt cold. "I know things have been difficult since our fight about having kids. I know you've been feeling confused and tired." I nodded, letting him think I still believed my symptoms were from stress. "I've been doing some research, and I think maybe we should take a trip together, get away from everything, clear our heads." Thomas squeezed my hands. "I found this beautiful cabin in the mountains, very private, very peaceful. We could leave tomorrow morning." Every alarm in my head was screaming. A private cabin in the mountains was the perfect place to make someone disappear. "That sounds wonderful," I lied. "But don't you have to work tomorrow?" "I already took time off. Everything's arranged." Thomas smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Pack light, okay? We won't need much." During dinner, Thomas kept talking about our trip, describing the cabin, the hiking trails, how quiet and isolated it would be. With every word, I became more certain that he was planning to kill me there, far from anyone who might hear me scream or find my body quickly. "I made your tea extra strong tonight," Thomas said, as he handed me the familiar mug. "I want you to get a really good night's sleep before our big adventure." I pretended to sip the tea, tasting the bitter undertone that I now knew was poison. "It tastes different tonight." "I added some honey," Thomas said quickly. "And maybe a little extra chamomile. You've seemed so stressed lately." As we got ready for bed, Thomas was more affectionate than he'd been in months. He kept touching my face, stroking my hair, telling me how much he loved me. But his hands felt like they were saying goodbye. "Nina," he whispered as I lay down, "I want you to know that everything I've done because I love you." I closed my eyes and waited, knowing that tonight, Thomas was going to try to kill me. The wire was recording, the cameras were rolling, and the police were waiting outside. But as I lay there in the dark, listening to Thomas moving around the room, I realized something terrifying. What if I'd miscalculated? What if tonight was the night I didn't wake up? I lay perfectly still as Thomas moved around our bedroom, my heart pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. The wire felt heavy against my chest, and I kept thinking about Detective Brooks's words. "Your safety is more important than getting a confession." But I needed Thomas to confess. I needed him to say out loud what he'd been planning, so there would be no doubt, no chance for him to talk his way out of this. Through my barely open eyes, I watched Thomas pull out his usual supplies, the small glass bottle, the syringe, the rubber gloves. But tonight, there were new items too. A large plastic sheet that he spread carefully on the floor beside our bed. A small bottle of pills that he set on the nightstand, and something that made my blood freeze. A typed letter that looked like a suicide note. Thomas sat on the edge of the bed and began talking to me in a soft voice, thinking I was already unconscious from the drugged tea. "I'm so sorry, Nina. I never wanted it to end this way." His voice was shaking. "But you started asking too many questions. You were getting suspicious about the tea, about the money. Jennifer says we can't wait any longer." Jennifer. Finally, he was talking about her out loud. "You would have figured it out eventually. You're too smart, too observant, and I can't go to prison, Nina. I can't lose everything I've worked for." Thomas picked up the syringe and began filling it with clear liquid. "Jennifer's pregnant. We're going to have the family I always wanted, and we need your money to start fresh somewhere new." My mind was reeling. Thomas was having a baby with another woman while planning to murder me for my money. The man I'd shared a bed with for 4 years, the man I'd trusted with my life, was a complete stranger. "The police will think you got depressed about our marriage problems and started taking pills," Thomas continued, holding up the bottle from the nightstand. "I've been researching your family history. Your aunt had depression, remember? It runs in families. And with all the stress you've been under lately, losing time, feeling confused, it'll make perfect sense." He was going to make my murder look like suicide, using the very symptoms he'd caused by drugging me as evidence that I was mentally unstable. Thomas stood up and walked to his dresser, pulling out a manila folder. "I've been documenting everything, Nina. Your mood swings, your memory problems, your complaints about feeling tired all the time. I even have recordings of you saying you felt like you were losing your mind." Recordings. He'd been recording our conversations, collecting evidence to use against me after he killed me. "Jennifer helped me plan this part," Thomas said, returning to the bed with the syringe. "She works in the medical field, so she knows exactly how much to give you. Enough to stop your heart, but not so much that it looks suspicious. Combined with the pills, it'll look like you took your own life." I wanted to scream, to jump up and run, but I forced myself to stay still. The wire was capturing everything. Detective Brooks and his team were hearing every word. Thomas leaned over me, and I could smell his cologne mixed with the rubber from his gloves. "I really did love you once, Nina, but love doesn't pay for the life Jennifer and I want. Your life insurance policy, your business, this house, it's worth almost $500,000, enough for us to disappear and start over." He raised the syringe, and I could see the needle glinting in the dim light from the hallway. This was it. This was the moment when Thomas would try to murder me. But then my phone buzzed on the nightstand. Thomas froze, the syringe still in his hand. The phone buzzed again, and the screen lit up with a text message. I couldn't see what it said, but Thomas could, and his face went white. "No, no, no," he whispered, setting down the syringe and grabbing my phone. "Who's texting you at midnight? Why is Patricia asking if you're okay?" Patricia must have gotten worried and decided to check on me, but her timing couldn't have been worse. Thomas looked at my phone, then at me, then back at the phone. I could see his mind racing, trying to figure out if someone suspected something, if someone might come looking for me. "You told someone," he said, his voice getting louder. "You told someone about the tea, didn't you?" I kept my eyes closed and my breathing steady, but Thomas was starting to panic. "Wake up, Nina," he shouted, shaking my shoulder. "I know you're not that deep asleep yet." Thomas shook me harder, his panic growing with each passing second. "Nina, I know you can hear me. Your friend wouldn't be texting unless you told her something." I couldn't pretend anymore. My eyes snapped open and I sat up quickly, backing away from him across the bed. "Stay away from me." Thomas's face went from panic to rage in an instant. "You've been awake this whole time. You heard everything." He lunged for the syringe on the nightstand. "It doesn't matter now. I'll just have to make this look different." "Help!" I screamed as loud as I could, knowing Detective Brooks was listening. "Help me!" Thomas grabbed my arm, trying to hold me still while he raised the syringe. "You ruined everything. Jennifer and I had it all planned out, and you had to go and ruin it." The bedroom door exploded open as Detective Brooks and 3 other officers burst in with their guns drawn. "Drop the weapon! Get away from her now!" Thomas looked around wildly, still holding the syringe. For a moment, I thought he might actually try to inject me anyway, but then he threw it across the room and put his hands up. "This isn't what it looks like," Thomas said, his voice suddenly calm and reasonable. "My wife has been having mental health problems. I was trying to help her sleep." "We heard everything, Mr. Rodriguez," Detective Brooks said as he handcuffed Thomas. "The wire your wife was wearing recorded your entire confession." Thomas's face crumpled as he realized what had happened. "You set me up," he whispered, looking at me with pure hatred. "You lying, manipulative—" "You've been drugging and stealing from your wife for 6 months," Detective Brooks interrupted. "And tonight you tried to murder her. You have the right to remain silent." As they led Thomas away, he turned back to me one last time. "Jennifer's having my baby, Nina. We were going to be happy. You took that away from us." Even as he was being arrested for trying to kill me, Thomas was still thinking about his other life, his other woman, his other future that he'd built on my money and my suffering. The trial took 8 months, and every day of it was like reliving a nightmare. The prosecutors used Thomas's notebook, the video recordings, the wire recordings, and the physical evidence to build an overwhelming case. Jennifer, his pregnant girlfriend, was arrested as an accomplice. She'd helped plan the murder and had been waiting in Portland for Thomas to join her with my money. The medical testimony was the hardest part to hear. Dr. Patricia Wells explained to the jury how the drugs Thomas had been giving me could have caused permanent brain damage or death. The expert witness said that if Thomas had succeeded with his plan that night, I would have died within minutes and it would have looked exactly like a drug overdose suicide. During his testimony, Thomas tried to claim he'd never meant to hurt me, that he'd just gotten in over his head with debt and made bad choices. But the recordings didn't lie. The jury heard him planning my murder in his own words. "The defendant systematically poisoned his wife for 6 months," the prosecutor said in her closing argument. "He stole her money, destroyed her health, and planned to end her life for financial gain. This wasn't a crime of passion or a moment of poor judgment. This was calculated, premeditated murder." The jury took less than 3 hours to find Thomas guilty on all charges: attempted murder, aggravated assault, theft, conspiracy, and fraud. The judge sentenced him to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole for 15 years. 6 months after the trial ended, I was finally starting to feel like myself again. The doctors confirmed that my cognitive function had returned to normal, though I still had nightmares sometimes. I'd moved to a new city, started fresh with my graphic design business, and slowly began to trust people again. I started a support group for women who'd experienced similar abuse. It amazed me how many stories were out there, how many women had been drugged, manipulated, or controlled by people who claimed to love them. Last week, I did something I thought I'd never be able to do again. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea. I sat in my new apartment, in my safe space, and I drank it slowly, tasting only chamomile and honey and peace. For the first time in over a year, I slept through the night without fear, knowing that the only person who controlled what went into my body was me.